Racist cop locked up Big Shaq's daughter like it was a game. Wrong move. What began as a flex of unchecked power turned into a national reckoning. Big Shaq didn't knock. He showed up and the ground shifted. By the time the truth hit the headlines, the badge wasn't protection, it was evidence. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The day was too perfect to end in a cage. The sun sat like a warm crown on the rooftops of Brentwood Heights, a neighborhood where white fences smiled across green lawns, and kids rode bikes without checking over their shoulders. Jade O'Neal drove her silver Mazda through the winding streets, with the windows down and music low, a blend of neo-soul and breezy optimism, humming through the speakers. She had just left a volunteer meeting at the local literacy center, where she'd helped a young girl spell the word freedom with glitter stickers. Now she was thinking of iced coffee and a long phone call with her dad. He always got sentimental on weekends. Always asked about the little things. Did you eat? Are you safe? Anybody bothering you out there? She usually laughed. Dad, I'm not a celebrity's daughter out here. I'm just Jade. That thought lingered in her mind like a soft echo when the red and blue lights bloomed behind her. She didn't panic. Not right away. She was clean. Her tags were valid. She hadn't even been speeding. Jade pulled over calmly, parked along the sidewalk near a quiet row of stores, and kept her hands on the wheel, just like she'd been taught. A nervous flutter did dance in her stomach though, the kind she'd trained herself to ignore. Then she saw him approach. Officer Brent Holloway was tall, mid-40s with a square jaw, and sharp eyes that scanned like they were always looking for something to challenge. His walk had a certain lean, too slow to be efficient, too confident to be cautious. Jade watched him approach through her side mirror, and the flutter became something colder. License and registration, he said, barely looking at her. Sure, she replied, her voice steady. She reached slowly, deliberately. No sudden moves. He looked around her car, his nose wrinkling. You live around here? I do, Jade answered. That your address on the license? It is. You always drive around here with your music that loud? Jade paused. It was under the legal limit. Holloway lingered beside her door, eyes narrowing. Step out of the car. What? Step out. She knew the tone. It wasn't about safety. It wasn't even about the car. This was about power, and something in his face told her he liked exercising it on people who looked like her. Still, Jade stepped out. The moment she did, his attitude changed. He began circling her like she was something he owned. He questioned everything. Her purpose, her clothes, her choice of neighborhood, her hair, her shoes, her tone, her audacity. You got an attitude problem, he said flatly, writing something on a notepad. That kind of thing don't go far in this town. I answered everything you asked, Jade said. You raise your voice one more time, you're going in, he said, smirking. Jade blinked. I haven't raised my voice. You challenging me now? She stood still. Inside, her blood thumped against her chest. Every part of her wanted to scream. But she didn't. She just looked at him, a long, burning look that said everything her silence could not. And just like that, he grabbed her wrist. The cold click of cuffs felt like betrayal. Not because of what she'd done. She knew she was clean. But because this wasn't about law. This was theater. And she was the show. A small group of passers-by began filming. Holloway noticed. His smile widened. Yeah, get this on tape. Say hi to Daddy. Jade's face stiffened. He didn't know. He couldn't know. And she wasn't going to tell him. Not because she didn't want out, but because she didn't want to be the kind of woman who used her father's name to crawl out of someone else's cruelty. The crowd was too quiet. That part always haunted her later. How no one stepped in, no one said anything. Just phones raised and mouths shut. She was walked to the squad car like she'd committed a crime. Like she was something broken being thrown away. Inside the cruiser, it smelled like sweat and despair. Holloway slid into the driver's seat and adjusted the rear view so he could see her. You think you're special, he said, voice low, almost amused. With your smart words and expensive perfume? Jade didn't answer. You people, he added, shaking his head. You never learn. The engine roared, and they drove off. From the outside, it was just another routine arrest in a city used to shrugging things off. But inside that cruiser, something seismic was already shifting. Downtown, the city was breathing through its Saturday kids. With soccer balls, couples with dogs, tourists with phones. At a small cafe near the river, Lucille O'Neal sat with a pastry and a warm coffee, scrolling her phone with casual grace. She loved these mornings, loved the air, the light, the feeling that the world was for once kind. Then her phone buzzed again. A blurry photo had been posted by a teenager on TikTok. A young black woman being cuffed near a strip mall, hair frizzed from the wind, eyes forward, shoulders straight. Even in poor lighting, Lucille knew that face. Jade. Her cup clattered to the ground. Somewhere 15 minutes away, Shaquille O'Neal was laughing with a group of kids on a basketball court. His presence was magnetic, towering, jovial, compassionate. He bent to tie a kid's shoe, helped another with a chest pad. When he wasn't cracking jokes, he was teaching life skills, not just how to shoot, but how to speak up, how to carry yourself. His phone buzzed once, then again, then 3 times in rapid succession. He glanced at the screen, then froze. The photo hit him like a freight train. The cuffs, the look in her eyes, the casual cruelty of the moment. His daughter, his baby, in a cop car. His smile disappeared. The kids didn't notice, not yet, but the air around him shifted. He handed his clipboard to the assistant coach. No words, no explanations. He walked to his car with a single purpose in his stride. At the station, Jade sat in a holding room, with cracked paint and flickering lights. Her wrists hurt. Her pride hurt worse. She had been booked under resisting arrest, a false charge she barely reacted to. She sat with her chin raised, heart heavy, surrounded by the stench of injustice that no one else seemed to smell. And somewhere out there, the man she refused to call was already coming for her. Not because she was helpless, but because she was his. And no one hurt what was his without consequences. Shaquille O'Neal stood at center court, his massive hands holding a microphone as the kids clustered around, their faces beaming with anticipation. His deep voice rolled across the gym, filling the space with warmth and laughter, as he handed out awards to kids from the youth center. For Shaq, these moments were everything. He wasn't Big Shaq here, not the celebrity or the legend. He was a mentor, a friend, a man who believed that lifting others was the only game worth winning. He ruffled a boy's hair, clapped another on the shoulder, posed for photos, and soaked in the easy joy of the afternoon. But then his phone buzzed. He ignored it at first, focused on the kids. But it buzzed again, harder, insistent. The third vibration made him glance down, and when he saw his mother's name flashing on the screen, his heart squeezed. Lucille didn't call during events, unless it was important. He excused himself softly, stepping into the hallway, the sounds of bouncing balls and laughter fading behind him. "Mom?" His voice was light, casual, but a flicker of unease tugged at his chest. Lucille's voice cracked like thin ice. "Shaquille, where's Jade?" His stomach tightened. "She's probably home, Ma. She was at the literacy center today, helping out." "No, she's not home. She should have been home 2 hours ago." And Lucille choked on the next words. "Someone posted a picture. Online. I saw it. Shaquille, she's in handcuffs." Shaq's chest went cold.
What?
"I'm looking at it right now, baby. It's Jade. She's being arrested." For a beat, everything around him disappeared. The hallway, the gym, the sounds of life. All he could hear was his mother's trembling voice, the faint hum of panic. He felt the blood rush to his head, his pulse roaring in his ears. His baby girl, the one he'd raised with such care, the one he'd taught to stand tall, to be proud, was in a police cruiser somewhere, alone. "Send me the post," he whispered, his throat tight. Seconds later, his phone pinged again. He opened the image. There it was, a blurry shot, snapped from across the street, but unmistakable. Jade, her dark curls wild, her head turned slightly, a flicker of defiance in her posture, and steel cuffs glinting around her wrists. Shaq's breath caught. For a moment, his massive body swayed like a tree hit by sudden wind. Without another word, he turned, walked briskly back into the gym, handed the event coordinator his clipboard, and murmured something that no one quite caught. His big hands shook slightly. As he fished for his car keys, he was already moving, his long strides purposeful, his mind racing through every possible explanation, every possible contact. But deep down, something raw was already clawing at him. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was something darker, more familiar, something he thought he'd protected Jade from all her life. He climbed into his car, slammed the door, and gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles ached. The city outside his window blurred as he drove. Traffic lights bled into meaningless shapes. He called Lucille back. She confirmed which precinct was holding Jade. Shaq's voice was calm, measured, but inside a storm was rising. He called Jade's phone. No answer. He called again. Left a voicemail. "Baby, it's Daddy. I'm coming. I'm on my way."
He didn't call a lawyer yet. He didn't call his agent or his team. He just drove, weaving through the streets like a man chasing his own heartbeat.
At the station, the front desk officer looked up lazily when Shaq pushed through the door. Heads turned, people recognized him instantly. His towering figure, his familiar face, the gentle giant from television ads and sports highlights. But Shaq wasn't here to smile. He wasn't here to pose for pictures. He walked up to the counter, his voice steady but sharp. "I'm here about Jade O'Neal." The officer, a young woman with tired eyes, blinked twice. "Do you have a relationship to the detainee?" Shaq's jaw tightened. "I'm her father." She clicked at her keyboard. "Sir, we can't release any details without legal. I need to know she's safe." "Sir, she's my daughter." There was a pause. A flicker of recognition crossed the officer's face, like she realized this wasn't just any concerned parent. But she kept her voice cool. "Let me check." She disappeared into the back, leaving Shaq standing at the counter, his massive shoulders heaving, his hands pressed against the cold surface. People nearby whispered. Some pulled out phones, snapping photos or recording quick videos. Shaq ignored them all. Minutes stretched like hours. Finally, the officer returned.
"She's in holding. That's all I can tell you right now."
Shaq clenched his fists, forced himself to breathe. "Can I see her?" "I'm sorry, sir. Not at this time." He closed his eyes, counted to 10. He knew losing his temper wouldn't help, but every second that passed twisted the knife deeper. Inside the holding cell, Jade sat on the bench, staring at the floor. Her hands still tingled from the tightness of the cuffs. She wondered if they knew who she was yet. Part of her hoped they didn't. Part of her burned with the unfairness of it all. The way Holloway had smirked, the way he'd made it personal, the way the system around him had silently backed him up. She thought about her dad. She imagined him pacing, worrying. She hated the idea of him hurting for her. But she also knew, if anyone could shake the walls of this place, it was Shaquille O'Neal. Outside, Shaq stepped back from the counter and ran a hand over his bald head. He called Lucille again. "Ma, I'm here. They won't let me see her." "Baby, you need to get someone on the legal side involved." "I know. You can't fight this alone." "I know." He hung up and dialed another number. Someone from his inner circle. Someone who could pull legal strings. His voice was lower now, more focused, a sharp contrast to the warm public figure the world always saw. Shaq was stepping into another role, not the celebrity, not the entertainer, but the father prepared to fight. Hours passed, the sun dipped lower, but Shaq didn't leave his post outside the precinct. Word was starting to spread. A small cluster of fans and supporters gathered near the station, holding up their phones, murmuring about what was happening. Shaq paid them no mind. His entire focus was on Jade, on getting her out, on making sure she was okay, on figuring out what had led to this nightmare. He thought back to every conversation they'd ever had about racism, about power, about how to navigate a world that too often saw skin before soul. He thought he'd prepared her. He thought she was strong. But now, as he stood outside these locked doors, he realized there were still monsters in the world that no amount of preparation could erase. Inside, Holloway sat in the break room, sipping his coffee, half listening to the buzz outside. Someone mentioned Shaquille O'Neal being in the lobby. He smirked to himself. "Big man's here for his princess," he muttered. What he didn't know was that the tides were shifting. Cameras were arriving. Reporters were asking questions. And Shaq, patient and measured, was beginning to assemble a storm of his own. One that wouldn't break bones, but would break headlines. Because Shaq knew this wasn't just about Jade anymore. It was about every black father who feared this moment. Every black daughter who had faced this cage. Every family that had been split by handcuffs and arrogance. And as the night crept closer, Shaq stood tall, ready to push back with every ounce of power he had. The room smelled of sour sweat and damp cement. Jade sat on a hard metal bench, her wrists aching from the pressure of the cuffs. Every breath she took echoed faintly off the cracked yellow walls, amplifying the tiny choking space she'd been stuffed into. Her mouth was dry, Her heartbeat thundered in her ears, but outwardly, she forced herself still, calm, composed, dignified. She knew deep down that in a place like this, they wanted to see her break. Outside her cell, Officer Brent Holloway paced slowly, the smug twist of his mouth unmistakable. He tapped his fingers along the bars in a slow, deliberate rhythm, as though testing the tension in the air. His eyes flicked to her occasionally, sharp and cold, like she was some wild animal on display. "You know," he drawled, voice oily, "I always wonder about girls like you. Little rich girls, with fancy cars, big last names. Think you're untouchable." He chuckled softly, tapping the bars again. "But here you are." Jade bit the inside of her cheek. She could feel the humiliation simmering just beneath her skin, creeping up her throat like bile. She wanted to shout, to demand he let her go, to tell him who she was. But the words caught. She heard her father's voice in her memory, calm but firm. "Keep your head. You let them see you rattled. They win. You stay calm. You stay smart." She clenched her fists against the cuffs. This wasn't about guilt or innocence. It wasn't even about the law. This was a performance, a game, and Holloway was the kind of man who played rough, not with fists, but with the rules he bent to his will. Holloway stopped tapping. He leaned closer to the bars, his smile thin. "You're awful quiet back there, princess. Not gonna call daddy? I hear he's kind of a big deal." Jade lifted her chin slowly, meeting his gaze. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction. She wouldn't let his words pierce the armor she was desperately patching together inside herself. Out in the front lobby, Shaq's massive frame loomed over the front desk, his deep voice low but tight with restrained urgency. "I'm here for Jade O'Neal. I need to see her. Now." The officer at the desk, a thin man in his 30s, with neatly parted hair, kept his expression bland. "Sir, as I explained, you'll need to wait until—" "I don't think you understand," Shaq rumbled, his fist planted firmly on the counter. "She's my daughter, and I need to see her, right now." The officer shifted slightly, glancing over Shaq's shoulder where a few onlookers had started to gather, whispering, snapping photos with their phones. Shaq could feel the attention pulling toward him like a magnet, but he didn't care. His world had shrunk to this point, this station, this desk, this door standing between him and Jade. "I'm sorry, sir," the officer repeated smoothly, "but we can't grant access without the proper legal—" Shaq slammed a hand flat on the desk, not violently, but hard enough to make the pens jump and the officer flinch. He leaned in closer, voice still low but ironclad. "You do not want to make this a public scene." The officer hesitated. Somewhere in the back, a higher-ranking officer peeked around a corner, murmuring to a colleague. Shaq knew he was being measured, judged, filed away as a threat, or a problem. He forced himself to step back, exhaling slowly, trying to keep the fury in his chest from boiling over. Inside the holding cell, Jade closed her eyes for a moment, drawing slow, shaky breaths. She imagined her father, not the public figure, not the sports icon, but the man who'd sat with her at the kitchen table, helping her with math homework, the man who cheered embarrassingly loud at her school plays, the man who could command a room but never made her feel small. She knew he was out there, pacing, worrying, plotting his way in. But that knowledge was a double-edged sword. She didn't want him to see her like this. Cuffed, cornered, reduced to nothing by a man with a badge and a smirk. Holloway circled back, checking his watch theatrically. "Funny thing," he said, voice slick. "Nobody's posted your bail yet. Wonder why that is." Jade finally spoke, her voice steady despite the crack she could feel lurking underneath. "You're enjoying this?" He shrugged. "It's just another day, sweetheart. Another shift. Another entitled kid learning how the world works." Her stomach twisted. She wanted to scream that she wasn't entitled, that she had worked hard, that she'd done everything right. But she knew it wouldn't matter to him. Holloway didn't see Jade. He saw a symbol, something to knock down to feel taller. Back in the lobby, Shaq's phone buzzed sharply against his palm. It was Lucille again. "Baby," she said quickly. "I called Camille Rhodes." The name hit Shaq like a lifeline. Camille Rhodes, the civil rights lawyer known for cracking police misconduct cases wide open, for putting pressure on city officials, for turning quiet incidents into national headlines. "She's on her way," Lucille said. "She said don't move until she gets there." Shaq exhaled hard. "Thanks, Ma." He hung up and turned back toward the desk. The officer gave him a thin, polite smile. the kind that was designed to infuriate. Shaq took another breath, feeling the tension coil in his chest. This wasn't a basketball game. There were no playbooks, no timeouts, just a father on one side, a system on the other, and his daughter locked in between. Inside, Holloway finally stepped away, muttering something about paperwork. Jade sagged slightly, the weight of everything pressing down on her all at once. She wanted to hold on to her pride, to her anger, to her clarity, but the fear kept slithering in, whispering that this could spiral, that this might not end tonight, that maybe even her father couldn't break through the walls being thrown up around her. She closed her eyes again, and imagined Shaq's hands, massive, warm, steady. She imagined the way he hugged her when she was little, how safe she had always felt in his arms. She gritted her teeth. Stay strong, Jade. Stay strong. Outside, the reporters had begun to gather. A local journalist from Channel 6 News stood near the precinct steps, holding a microphone, whispering into her earpiece. The news truck parked nearby hummed softly. Shaq watched from the corner, his jaw set. He hated the cameras, hated the attention, but if they were going to paint his family into the public eye, he'd make sure the truth got told. Camille Rhodes arrived not long after, a sharp-eyed black woman in her 40s, dressed in sleek black, her energy fierce and focused. She approached Shaq with a firm handshake and a grim nod. "I'm going in," she said. "Stay here. Keep calm. We do this the right way." Shaq gave a tight nod, his fists unclenched slightly, though his heart still pounded. Inside, Jade heard the faint stir of voices outside the door. Something was shifting. She sat up straighter, brushing her curls back from her face, trying to pull herself back together. She didn't know what was coming next, but she could feel the air change, something pressing in, something bending the lines that had been holding her in place. She took one more deep breath. Because if there was one thing Jade O'Neal knew, it was this. Her story wasn't over yet. Shaq's massive figure filled the cramped lobby, his shoulders brushing the edges of the space, as if the walls themselves wanted to step back. His face known across the country, on TV screens, in commercials, on billboards, was now set in a hard, focused mass. His towering presence was usually enough to part crowds and smooth obstacles. But here, under the flickering lights of the police station, his fame was met with thin smiles, slow nods, and the cold, deliberate pace of bureaucracy. At the front desk, a sergeant with salt and pepper hair tapped at a keyboard with exaggerated patience, not meeting Shaq's eyes. "Mr. O'Neal, we've explained. The system has its process. You can't just walk in." Shaq leaned forward slightly, his voice low and steady. "She's my daughter." The sergeant finally glanced up, a faint, practiced smirk on his face. "And that's not how custody works, sir." Behind Shaq, the air had shifted. Outside the glass doors, reporters were starting to gather, their camera crews setting up, microphones poised. The buzz of public curiosity was growing, seeping through the walls of the station. But inside, the officers kept moving at their own pace, protected by the same invisible barrier that had shielded them for decades. The blue wall. Shaq exhaled sharply, stepping back, hands on his hips. His heart pounded, a tight, unfamiliar sensation rising in his chest. Helplessness. He wasn't used to this feeling. His entire life had been about breaking through walls, lifting obstacles, transforming moments with his sheer presence. But here, against polished badges and stiff uniforms, his weight didn't matter, his money didn't matter, his name didn't matter. Inside the holding area, Holloway stood near Jade's cell, arms folded, a smirk tugging at his lips. "Bet Daddy's out there making calls. Maybe the mayor, huh? Maybe the governor? You rich kids always think someone's gonna come running." Jade sat on the bench, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, her gaze sharp and unblinking. She didn't flinch, didn't answer, but inside a storm was swirling. She knew her father was out there, pushing every door he could, and she knew, maybe better than Holloway, that not all doors open just because you knock hard. Holloway tapped the bars lightly with his knuckles. "You know what I like about this job?" he mused. "Doesn't matter who you are. In here, you're mine." Jade's fingers curled into fists. She wasn't sure how much longer she could keep her calm, her sense of balance, her composure. The hours were pressing down on her, squeezing the breath out of her chest. She wanted to believe in the system, in her father's strength, in the power of truth. But right now, all she had was the cold bench under her, and the steady drumbeat of humiliation. Outside, Camille Rhodes strode up the steps, her sharp eyes darting across the growing crowd of reporters. She moved like someone who understood exactly how public pressure worked, not just the law, but the court of public opinion. Shaq turned as she approached, the tension in his shoulders easing just slightly. "Any update?" he asked quickly. "They're stonewalling," Camille said bluntly. "Classic. But the media's here, and that changes the game. They want this quiet. We make it loud." Shaq nodded tightly, clenching his fists. "I just want her out." "I know," Camille said. "And we're going to get her. But we do this smart." Inside, Holloway was no longer smiling. He had stepped away from the cell, phone in hand, murmuring into it with short, clipped phrases. His supervisor, Captain Donnelly, had appeared in the hallway, eyes darting nervously toward the rising noise outside. The story was slipping out of control. Donnelly gave Holloway a sharp look. "You better have a clean report." Holloway gritted his teeth. "It's clean. It better be," Donnelly snapped. "Because that's not just any father out there. That's a man with cameras." Jade felt the shift before she heard it. The murmurs outside, the subtle rush of movement in the station, the way officers began glancing toward the lobby, whispering to one another. Something was cracking in the air. She sat up straighter, brushing a shaky hand through her hair, willing herself to stay present, to stay strong. Outside, Shaq stood before the cameras, his massive form calm and grounded. Camille stepped beside him, fielding questions with practiced precision. Shaq wasn't there to play celebrity. He was there to be a father, and that showed in every word he spoke. "I'm here because my daughter has been detained without cause," he said, his voice carrying across the microphones. "This isn't about fame. This isn't about money. This is about a young black woman who was targeted because someone thought they could." The crowd stirred. Reporters scribbled notes. Cameras zoomed in. The moment had arrived. The quiet injustice was now a public event. Inside, Holloway paced, his face darkening. He hadn't expected this to escalate. He'd expected Jade to crack, to call daddy and beg, to prove she was just another privileged kid who thought she was untouchable. But she hadn't cracked, and outside her father wasn't storming in. He was playing the public game, the one Holloway had no power over. Jade watched him quietly, noting the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw twitched. She felt a flicker of grim satisfaction. He was losing his grip. Back at the desk, Camille slid a document across the counter. "We're officially filing a motion to review this arrest," she told the desk officer smoothly, "and we're notifying the press of every delay." The officer shifted uncomfortably. "We are processing." Shaq watched, his jaw clenched, his fingers tapping against his leg. He was used to speed-fast games, fast solutions, fast wins. But this was slow. This was grinding. This was the kind of battle that wasn't won with strength, but with relentless, unflinching pressure. Inside the cell, Jade let out a slow, shaky breath. She thought about her father outside, thought about the cameras, the reporters, the lawyer working the system. She thought about the man pacing near her door, growing more restless by the minute. She knew this was no longer about her alone. It was about power, about who got to hold it, and who had the nerve to take it back. She closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the moment settle over her. She would not break. Nightfall wrapped itself over Brentwood Heights, but the police station glowed like a wound under the street lamps. What had started as a scattered murmur in the neighborhood had now rippled into a swelling current. Word was Shaquille O'Neal's daughter, Jade, was locked up inside, and the crowd outside the station was no longer just a handful of reporters. Protesters gathered with cardboard signs painted hastily, but boldly, fists raised, voices joined in rhythmic chants that echoed across the darkened street. "Let her out! Let her out!" The police building, so cold and impassive during the day, now pulsed under the weight of public attention. Shaq stood at the edge of it all, his silhouette unmistakable, towering under the glow of the street lamp. His big hands were clenched into knots at his sides, his face unreadable but electric with focus. He could feel the vibrations of the crowd in his bones, could hear their shouts rise and fall, their righteous anger building into something he hadn't expected. But even in the swirl of it, Shaq stayed apart, watching, waiting, resisting the urge to storm the gates. He knew power wasn't just in noise, it was in timing. Inside the station, the energy had shifted. Holloway, once smirking, once so sure, now paced with short, clipped steps, his eyes darting toward the front entrance, every few seconds. The windows rattled faintly from the collective chants outside, and his nerves twitched at each vibration. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't expected her. Jade O'Neal, sitting quietly behind the bars, watching him, her face bruised with exhaustion, but not defeat. She hadn't cracked the way he thought she would. Captain Donnelly appeared in the doorway, his face tight with tension. "You better clean this up," he hissed under his breath, stepping close to Holloway. "There are cameras outside. Reporters. They're smelling blood." Holloway snorted, wiping a hand down his face. "She's just another brat who thought her daddy could bail her out." Donnelly's glare sharpened. "That daddy has half the city outside right now. And the press isn't here for you, Brent. They're here for him." For the first time, Holloway's cocky edge slipped. He turned, glancing back at the holding cell where Jade sat, her gaze locked on his. She hadn't said a word in hours, but her silence was its own kind of weapon, unblinking, unwavering, reflecting back all his insecurity. Holloway's jaw twitched. Instead of backing off, he doubled down. He grabbed a file off the nearby desk, flipping through it roughly. "False charges," he muttered under his breath. "Resisting arrest, threat to public order, reckless behavior. We can stack it if we need to." Donnelly's eyes widened. "You're digging yourself a grave." Holloway's grin twitched back into place. "Or I'm protecting the department." Outside, Shaq paced in slow, measured circles, feeling the electricity in the crowd rise with every passing minute. He caught snippets of conversations, fans calling his name, activists calling for justice, community members telling their own stories of mistreatment. He didn't want this to turn into chaos. He wanted clarity, he wanted focus. But as the night stretched on, he could feel the tension in the air like a drawn bowstring, pulled tight and waiting to snap. Camille Rhodes, standing a few steps away, spoke quietly into her phone, coordinating legal reinforcements, prepping statements, filing motions. She was a force, precise, tireless, sharp-eyed. She turned to Shaq briefly, her brow furrowed. "They're stalling," she murmured. "They're scared, but they're not cracking yet." Shaq exhaled hard, glancing back at the station. He thought of Jade, his little girl, his pride, his fierce, stubborn fighter. He imagined her sitting in that cell, facing down this cruelty, with nothing but her spine and her willpower. His chest tightened. He wasn't used to waiting. He was a man of action, a man of momentum. But tonight all he could do was stand still and wait for the walls to tremble. Inside, Jade felt the vibrations. She heard the chants, distant but insistent, pulsing through the walls like a heartbeat. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the sound wrap around her like armor. It wasn't just her father out there anymore. It was a city, a community, strangers standing up because they saw something wrong. Holloway reappeared, tossing papers onto a desk, his expression souring as he read them over. Jade opened her eyes and watched him, her gaze steady, unflinching. She knew his type. She knew the games they played, the walls they hid behind, but she also knew the cracks were starting to show. The crowd outside grew louder, the chants sharper, the energy more electric. People climbed onto car hoods, waving signs, live streaming on their phones, sharing every moment with the world. Across the city, hashtags trended, news alerts pinged, and television screens flickered with breaking news banners. Shaq stood in the middle of it, his figure a calm center in the storm. He felt hands clap him on the back, heard voices urging him to speak, to lead the chants, to make a statement. But he stayed silent for now, waiting, letting Camille navigate the legal chessboard while he held the moral line. Because Shaq knew something Holloway didn't. Power wasn't just about what you held in your hands. It was about what people believed you stood for. Inside, Captain Donnelly rubbed his temples, pacing the hallway. "We need to let her go," he muttered under his breath. "This isn't worth the fallout." Holloway scoffed. "We let her go now. We admit we screwed up." Donnelly shot him a sharp look. "You did screw up." The tension between them simmered, thick and crackling. Holloway's face flushed, his pride swelling up, choking him. He wasn't ready to surrender. Not yet. Not to her. Not to the cameras outside. Not even to the man whose shadow loomed over the entire situation. In her cell, Jade shifted slightly, her back aching, her arms sore. She felt the weight of the moment, pressing down on her. But she also felt something else. A flicker of resolve, of stubborn determination. She thought of the little girls she'd tutored, the young women who looked up to her, the people who saw her not just as Shaquille O'Neal's daughter, but as Jade, the fighter, the dreamer, the woman who wouldn't break. She straightened her shoulders. She wasn't going to break tonight. Outside, Shaq finally stepped forward, his voice low but steady, as he addressed the crowd directly. "We're here for justice," he called out, his deep voice rippling across the night air. "We're here for dignity. We're here because every one of us knows what it feels like to be silenced, to be crushed, to be ignored. But tonight we are not silent." The crowd erupted in cheers, their energy surging higher. Camille stepped beside Shaq, adding her voice, her sharp legal mind weaving facts and fire into a rallying cry. Together they stood on the front lines, the cameras capturing every word, every gesture, every tremor of determination. Inside, Holloway clenched his fists, his jaw grinding. He could hear the crowd through the walls, could feel the walls themselves begin to tremble. He wasn't used to being on the defensive. He wasn't used to being the one corner. And yet here he was. Captain Donnelly leaned in close, his voice sharp. "End this, Brent. Before you bring the whole damn house down." But Holloway wasn't ready to fold.
Not yet.
Shaq sat inside his black SUV, the engine idling, his massive hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles blanched. His broad shoulders hunched forward, his head bowed. He stared at the glowing dashboard as the noise of the crowd pulsed outside. But in his head the noise was older, deeper. It wasn't the chants and shouts filling the streets right now. It was the echoes of a past he had worked his whole life to outrun. He remembered the locker rooms, the arenas, the hotel lobbies in the early days, before the endorsements, before the legendary titles, before the world turned him into a smiling media giant. He remembered the whispers when he walked into luxury stores, the suspicious eyes watching his every move, the reporters whose questions were dipped in condescension. He remembered the night he was stopped outside a five-star hotel, keys in hand, only to be asked what he was doing there. He remembered the heavy, bitter taste of knowing that no matter how high you rose, there were some people determined to drag you back down. And now, here it was again, not aimed at him but at Jade, his little girl. His phone buzzed on the passenger seat. He snatched it up, pressing it to his ear. Lucille's voice came through, trembling but firm. "Baby, listen to me. You need to stay calm." Shaq pressed his forehead to the steering wheel, his eyes squeezed shut. "Ma, they've got her in there. They've got my baby." "I know, Shaquille, I know. But you can't go breaking through those doors. That's what they want. You've got people, baby. You've got a city behind you." He let out a long, ragged breath. "This isn't just about her anymore, Ma. This is bigger." Lucille was silent for a moment. "Then you do what you've always done. You stand tall." The line clicked off. Shaq sat still for one more heartbeat, then another, and then like a giant rising from the deep, he stepped out of the car. The moment Shaq emerged from the SUV, the crowd stirred, faces turned, phones shot up. The cameras outside the station, already trained on the protest, now had their centerpiece. Shaq wasn't dressed like a celebrity tonight. No designer coat, no polished shoes, no carefully styled look. He was just a father, a man in a hoodie and jeans, standing under the raw glare of streetlights. Camille Rhodes saw him approach and stepped aside, giving him space. Shaq moved forward slowly, deliberately, and faced the crowd. He raised his hands, palms open, commanding quiet without saying a word. The chants faded into a hush, a collective breath held on the edge of a moment. Shaq's deep voice rolled out, smooth but thunderous. "I'm standing here tonight as a father." The crowd rippled, people leaning in, phones trembling in hands. "I'm standing here because my daughter is behind those walls," he said, his chest heaving. "Because a man with a badge decided she was a threat, a problem, a target. Not because of what she did, but because of who she is." His eyes swept across the faces before him. Young, old, black, white, tired, angry, hopeful. "And I know," he continued, "that I am not the first father to stand here. I know there have been too many before me, too many names we carry in our mouths, too many stories we carry in our bones." He paused, his massive frame steady. "But tonight, we stand together." The crowd erupted. Cheers, shouts, fists raised high. Camille stepped back, watching the energy ripple outward, knowing this was no longer just about legal maneuvers. This was about the heart of the city, the raw pulse of collective outrage and determination. Inside the station, Holloway paced like a caged animal. He could hear the noise, the waves of shouting and chanting battering the walls. Captain Donnelly was on the phone, voice tight and sharp, glancing nervously toward the entrance. "You've stirred up a damn hornet's nest, Brent," Donnelly snapped once he hung up. "We've got city officials breathing down our necks. We've got news outlets running the story live. We've got half the damn country watching now." Holloway's jaw clenched. "I did my job. You're about to burn this department to the ground." But Holloway didn't back down. Not yet. He still thought he could win this game. In her cell, Jade closed her eyes and leaned her head back against the wall, straining to catch pieces of the noise outside. She felt the energy shift through the air, like a current, surging and crackling. She thought of her father, his face, his hands, his voice, standing outside, lifting his voice over the walls that caged her. She imagined the faces in the crowd, the people who had come not because they knew her, but because they recognized the injustice in what had been done. Her throat tightened, but she didn't cry. She wouldn't cry. She would stand. Even sitting here, she would stand. Shaq moved through the crowd, speaking to activists, shaking hands, adding his massive weight, not just physical but symbolic, to the force pressing on the station. Camille coordinated with legal teams, fielding calls, threading together the next steps. News anchors reported live, their voices sharp with urgency, as the night swelled with tension. But Shaq knew this wasn't just about pressure. It was about resolve, about showing that no matter how thick the walls, they would not be silenced. He stepped back onto the makeshift stage someone had set up, lifted the microphone again, and let his voice roll out once more. "We are here because we believe in a future where our daughters can walk free, where our sons can drive home without fear, where no one has to wonder if their skin will decide their fate." The cheers surged like a wave, rolling over the pavement, crashing against the station walls. Inside, Holloway's hands shook slightly as he gripped the desk. His arrogance flickered under the weight of the noise. He'd played this game before, but never at this scale, never with this many eyes watching. Captain Donnelly loomed beside him, his face grim. "It's over, Brent." But Holloway wasn't ready to hear it. "Not yet." Shaq felt Camille touch his arm gently. "We've got movement inside," she murmured. "They're feeling the heat." Shaq gave a tight nod, his eyes locked on the station doors. He knew this wasn't the end. It was barely the middle. But he also knew they had pushed the walls to creak, and once they started creaking, it was only a matter of time before they cracked. He lifted his head, his broad shoulders straightening under the night sky. Somewhere inside, Jade was waiting, and he was going to bring her home, not with fists, not with fury, but with the unstoppable weight of truth. Inside the station, Brent Holloway sat stiffly in the break room, eyes locked on the glowing TV mounted in the corner. The live news broadcast was unmistakable. Shaquille O'Neal, standing tall before the crowd, microphones clustered in front of him, cameras capturing every word, every sharp inhale. The news anchor's voice cut crisply through the small room. "We are live at Brentwood Heights Police Station, where protests continue to swell following the controversial arrest of Jade O'Neal, daughter of former NBA star Shaquille O'Neal." Holloway's jaw worked as he clenched his teeth, a thin film of sweat glistening at his temples. His leg bounced nervously under the table. Around him, the usual banter between officers was gone. The room felt tight, compressed, as though the walls themselves were leaning in to listen. A few officers had drifted away, muttering quiet excuses, avoiding eye contact. Rizad sat stone-faced, arms crossed, but even they were glancing sideways, unsure. Holloway could feel it, the invisible line drawing itself in the room. Colleagues slowly peeling away, unwilling to stand too close to the stink of a man under fire. He muttered under his breath, flipping through papers, searching for something, anything to shield himself. The charges he'd written up against Jade, resisting arrest, disorderly conduct, obstruction, they were shaky at best. And now, under the weight of public attention, they looked flimsier by the minute. His hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his collar, trying to push back the heat crawling up his neck. In her holding cell, Jade O'Neal sat on the edge of the bench, sensing the shift in the air. She could feel it, the subtle retreat of footsteps down the hall, the uneasy quiet settling over the station. She leaned forward, heart thudding, and called out sharply to the officer on duty. "I want my phone call." The officer, younger, clearly rattled, hesitated. "You already used your—" "No, I didn't," Jade cut in firmly. "And I want to call my lawyer." The young man looked torn, glancing toward Holloway's office, but the hesitation lasted only a moment before he sighed and moved toward the phone. Jade's pulse raced. She didn't need her father right now. She needed Camille Rhodes. the woman who knew how to rip apart these systems from the inside. Outside, Shaq and Camille stood side by side, a sharp contrast, his towering grounded presence beside her sleek, coiled intensity. Together they drafted a public statement, a measured but powerful call for accountability. Reporters clustered tightly around them, hanging on Camille's precise legal language, on Shaq's deep heartfelt pleas.
"We are here not to destroy but to demand transparency," Camille declared, her voice crisp into the microphones. "This is not just about one arrest. This is about a pattern, a system, a rot that we will no longer accept."
Shaq stepped forward, his voice heavy with both pain and strength. "This is about every father who fears for his child, every family waiting for the knock on the door, every name we've carried too long in silence." The crowd erupted in applause, the energy outside the station thrumming like electricity. Inside, Holloway's hands curled into fists. He could hear the echoes even through the walls. His phone buzzed, lighting up with texts, some from superiors, others from political contacts, a few from old friends who suddenly sounded very cautious. He shoved the phone into his pocket, pacing the room. Captain Donnelly appeared in the doorway, arms crossed, a sharp look in his eyes. "They want you to stand down, Brent." Holloway's nostrils flared. "I did nothing wrong." Donnelly raised an eyebrow. "Did you?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Holloway's mouth opened, then closed again. His pulse thundered in his ears. He could feel the cracks beginning, hairline fractures spidering out, under the weight of scrutiny. Jade, gripping the phone tightly, waited as the line connected. Camille's voice on the other end was a balm, a tether. "Jade, it's Camille. I'm here. We're outside." Jade let out a shaky breath, her hands trembling. "I need you to get me out of here." "I know," Camille said softly. "Hold on. We're almost there." The brief conversation steadied Jade, her spine straightening as she handed the phone back. She could feel the shift, the tipping point drawing near. The game Holloway had been playing was cracking open, and she was ready to push back. Outside, the media pressure intensified. News trucks lined the street, commentators weighing in live, activists sharing updates across social media. Camille coordinated legal filings in real time, pressing on the department with precision. Shaq's presence fueled the fire, drawing eyes and voices to the fight. But inside the station, Holloway gritted his teeth, refusing to surrender. He pulled open a drawer, flipping through files, muttering to himself. "They won't get me on this. They can't." Donnelly's voice behind him was low and cold. "They already have." As the night deepened, the station became a pressure cooker. Officers moved stiffly, the normal rhythms of the precinct disrupted by the weight of the outside world pressing in. Holloway tried to rally, tried to bluff his way through, but his colleagues were no longer backing him. Quiet conversations bloomed in corners, cautious glances passed between desks. No one wanted to go down with a sinking ship. Jade sat quietly, feeling the vibrations in the floor, the way the very walls seemed to hold their breath. She knew something was about to break. Shaq, standing with Camille under the floodlights, felt a sudden stillness in the air. Camille's phone buzzed sharply. She glanced at the screen, her mouth tightening. "They're moving inside," she said quietly. Shaq's heart pounded, his fists clenched and unclenched. He wanted to rush in, wanted to throw his weight against the doors, but he stayed planted, steady, letting Camille handle the threads. Inside, Holloway's mask cracked. An internal affairs officer arrived, his face set in grim lines. "We're opening an investigation," he told Holloway sharply. "You're to step back from this case, effective immediately." Holloway's face flushed a deep, angry red. "You're throwing me under the bus." "No," the officer said flatly. "You threw yourself there." Jade heard the voices down the hall. Sharp, clipped, urgent. She rose slowly from the bench, her pulse thrumming. She wasn't sure what was happening, but she knew it mattered. Outside, Camille looked up, eyes narrowing. "It's happening." Shaq's massive frame shifted, his breath coming in sharp pulls. "Are they letting her out?" Camille nodded tightly. "They're cornered." The crowd roared as the doors began to stir, the chant swelling into a deafening wave. Shaq stepped forward, his heart pounding, his body coiled with anticipation. Inside, Jade took a step forward as the door creaked open. The night air buzzed with the tense electricity of something about to snap. Under the glare of floodlights, Shaq stood still, his eyes fixed on the precinct doors, his breath tight in his chest. Camille Rhodes, her phone glued to her ear, paced sharply beside him, her expression sharpening with each passing second. Then she stopped, her face lighting up with a flicker of satisfaction. "They found it," she whispered, turning to Shaq. Shaq's brow furrowed. "What?" Camille lifted her chin, her voice clipped and fierce. "We got Holloway's record. Buried complaints, paid-off settlements, internal notes that never saw the light of day. He's not clean. He's been a problem for years." Shaq's massive shoulders tensed, his fists curling at his sides. "How sure are you?" Camille gave a thin, determined smile. "I'm sure. And the media's already biting." Inside the station, Holloway sat rigid at his desk, watching the live news feed on the TV as a reporter breathlessly detailed the breaking twist. Sources tell us Officer Brent Holloway, currently at the center of the Jade O'Neal controversy, has a history of misconduct allegations, including multiple excessive force complaints and at least 2 settlements petted out quietly by the city. Until now, these details have been kept from the public. The color drained from Holloway's face. His hands trembled slightly as he fumbled for his phone, only to see message after message flashing across the screen. Colleagues distancing themselves, old friends going silent, higher-ups demanding explanations. Captain Donnelly appeared in the doorway, his face carved into a hard, unforgiving mask. "It's over, Brent." Holloway shot to his feet, his voice cracking. "You can't just throw me under the bus." Donnelly's gaze was cold. "You threw yourself there the moment you thought you could bury this." In her cell, Jade heard the surge of noise outside, the rising pitch of the chants and cheers, the reporters' excited voices echoing faintly down the hallway. She straightened slowly, her body stiff from hours on the bench, her heart hammering with a mix of exhaustion and fierce defiance. She knew, even before the door swung open, that the tides had finally turned. The young officer appeared, his eyes wide and uncertain, fumbling with the keys. Holloway hovered just behind him, his expression tight, his smirk gone. Jade stepped forward carefully, chin raised, eyes locking on Holloway's. For a long moment, they stood there, her bruised but unbowed, him shrinking under the weight of his own collapsing shield. Jade's voice was quiet but cutting. "You're not untouchable." Holloway's jaw twitched, his fists clenching at his sides. But no words came. Outside, Camille climbed the makeshift platform once more, her voice sharp and commanding as she addressed the restless crowd. "We have confirmed reports that Officer Holloway has a pattern of misconduct, and tonight, we demand accountability." The crowd erupted, the chants swelling, fists raised high. Shaq stepped beside her, his towering frame grounded, his voice steady and deep as it rolled out over the sea of faces. "I stand here tonight not as an athlete, not as a celebrity, but as a father," Shaq called out, his voice rumbling like distant thunder. "A father who will not watch another child, mine or anyone else's, be crushed under a system that pretends it's blind, but always sees color." The crowd surged, the noise trembling against the precinct walls, a living force that Holloway could no longer ignore or outrun. Inside, Holloway's breathing grew ragged. Donnelly's voice cut through the rising panic. "You're done, Brent. You want to leave here in one piece. You walk out now and you shut up." Holloway's eyes darted to the hallway, where Jade stood waiting, flanked now by internal affairs officers and legal reps. His world, the world he'd controlled, shaped, hidden behind, was crumbling, piece by piece, right in front of him. With a final shaky breath, Holloway shoved past Donnelly and stormed down the hall, his shoulders hunched, his steps heavy. As he passed Jade, their eyes met for one last time, and in that moment, she saw it, not the smirk, not the arrogance, but the hollow, shrinking man inside. She watched him go, her heart pounding, her breath sharp, her spirit unbroken. Outside, as the station doors creaked open, the crowd roared. Shaq's head snapped up, his chest tightening as he stepped forward, eyes scanning the figures emerging into the floodlights. And then, there she was, Jade, her hair disheveled, her face pale but fierce, her steps steady as she crossed the threshold. For a beat, everything froze. The cameras, the crowd, even the city itself seemed to hold its breath. Then Shaq moved, striding forward, his long arms sweeping Jade into an embrace so fierce it lifted her off her feet. Jade buried her face against his chest, the weight of the night crashing over her in waves. The cameras flashed, the reporters shouted. But in that moment, there was only the two of them, a father and daughter, battered but standing. Camille stepped forward, her voice sharp as she faced the press. "We will be filing formal complaints, pursuing investigations, and demanding full accountability for every person involved in tonight's injustice. This is not the end. It's the beginning. Shaq, still holding Jade close, turned to the cameras, his voice quiet but steady. We didn't ask for a fight tonight, but if you come for one of us, you come for all of us. The crowd roared again, the noise rolling through the streets, rattling windows, shaking the night awake. Inside, Holloway sat in a small office, head in his hands, as the paperwork began to pile up. His shield had cracked, his cover was gone, and outside the world was watching. Jade stood under the floodlights, surrounded by her father, her lawyer, her community, her city. She knew the fight wasn't over, not by a long shot, but she also knew this. They had pushed back, they had stood tall, and they had broken through. She took a deep breath, feeling the cool night air on her skin, the burn of adrenaline still rushing through her veins. Her father's massive arms stayed wrapped protectively around her shoulders, grounding her, holding her steady. And as the crowd surged, the cameras flashed, and the city's whispers turned into a roar. Jade lifted her head high. The shield was broken. And now it was time to rebuild something better. The night air pulsed with the weight of a city on edge. Yet in every raised fist, every echoing chant, there was control. Fierce, furious control. The crowd outside the Brentwood Heights police station had swollen into the thousands, voices rising in unity. The collective demand rolling across the streets like a rising tide. But there were no bricks thrown, no bottles shattered, no windows smashed. Shaq stood at the front, his towering frame commanding attention, his deep voice rolling through a megaphone, urging the crowd, "Stay calm, stay loud, but stay calm." He moved through the mass of bodies like a steady rock, shaking hands, locking eyes, clapping shoulders. The people listened, the chants rose in waves. Justice for Jade. Hold him accountable. End the cover-ups. Every voice added to the roar, but not a single one called for destruction. Camille Rhodes stood beside Shaq, her sharp voice coordinating legal teams, reporters, and local activists. She knew how quickly protests could spiral when tension cracked the air like static. But tonight, there was a clarity, a shared determination to push back without shattering. She lifted her phone, watching media outlets push out headlines in real time. Officer Brent Holloway suspended pending investigation. City officials scrambling to respond to O'Neal arrest scandal. Inside the precinct, Holloway sat slumped in a chair, his face pale, his hands trembling slightly. Captain Donnelly entered, followed by two internal affairs officers, their expressions grim, professional, sealed tight. "It's done, Brent," Donnelly said, his voice low. "Effective immediately, you're suspended pending full investigation. Hand over your badge." Holloway's breath hitched. "You can't." "We can. And we are." With mechanical movements, Holloway reached for his chest, unpinned the shield he had once flashed so proudly, and set it on the table. The clang was small, but the sound echoed deep inside him. As they escorted him away, his eyes darted once more toward the door that led to the holding cells, to Jade O'Neal, to the girl he had tried to crush under weightless authority. But that door, tonight, was closed to him. Outside, the moment arrived. The precinct doors creaked open. Shaq's breath caught, his massive chest rising sharply as he stepped forward, the crowd pressing in around him. And then, there she was, Jade, bruised, exhausted, but upright, her head held high, her shoulders squared, her eyes shining under the harsh lights. For a heartbeat, the street fell silent, and then the crowd erupted. Cheers exploded into the night, fists pumping the air, tears streaming down faces. Jade stumbled forward into Shaq's arms, her father's massive embrace wrapping her up, lifting her slightly off the ground as though anchoring her back to life. She buried her face against his shoulder, her body shaking with held-back sobs, the exhaustion of the night breaking loose, only now in his arms. Shaq squeezed his eyes shut, the tears sliding freely down his face, soaking into the collar of his shirt. He didn't care about the cameras, the reporters, the onlookers. Right here, right now, he was only a father holding his child. Camille moved swiftly to the microphones, her voice cutting through the cheers. "Tonight we see what accountability looks like. But let's be clear, this is not the end. This is just the beginning of a larger fight. We will hold this department, this city, and this system to the highest standards. We demand justice, not just for Jade, but for every person whose story has been buried, every voice that has been silenced." The crowd surged with agreement, the chants swelling again. Shaq finally pulled back, his massive hands cradling Jade's face, his thumbs brushing away the tears on her cheeks. "You okay, baby?" he murmured, his voice cracking. Jade gave a small, tired smile. "Yeah, Dad. I'm okay." They stood there, father and daughter, surrounded by a city watching, a nation listening, the floodlights casting long shadows behind them. But the shadows didn't fall over them anymore. They fell behind them, because now they were stepping forward. As the crowd continued chanting, local leaders took turns speaking. Activists who had marched in protest for years, pastors who had prayed over too many funerals, mothers who had waited up countless nights for their children to come home safe. All of them lifted their voices into the night, weaving together a tapestry of grief, anger, hope, and determination. Shaq stayed by Jade's side, his arm around her shoulders, his presence grounding her as the noise and movement swirled around them. He felt the exhaustion in his bones, but also the fire still burning in his chest. This was bigger than him, bigger than his daughter. This was about what kind of world they would leave behind. Back inside the precinct, Captain Donnelly stood at the window, watching the crowd ripple and surge. He exhaled slowly, knowing this night would ripple through the department for years to come. Mistakes had been made, walls had been cracked, and now, under the glare of national scrutiny, they would either change or break apart completely. Holloway sat in a side room, head down, his hands cuffed loosely in front of him now. For the first time in years, he wasn't shielded by his badge, his rank, or his power. He was just a man facing the reckoning he had earned. As the night wore on, the protest remained peaceful, the chants steady, the energy focused. News anchors marveled live on television at the restraint, the power of a crowd demanding change without unleashing destruction. Camille spoke to reporters about the next steps: formal investigations, civil suits, community reforms. Shaq and Jade gave a brief statement, their words simple but searing. "We will keep fighting," Shaq said, his deep voice carrying across the microphones. "Not just for our family, but for every family." Jade, her voice quieter but no less fierce, added, "We're not just surviving, we're standing." As the crowd slowly began to disperse, people hugging one another, sharing stories, wiping away tears, Shaq guided Jade toward the car, his massive hand gently cradling the back of her head. Camille walked with them, her phone still buzzing with calls, her mind already racing ahead to the legal battles to come. But for a moment, just a moment, Shaq allowed himself to pause, to feel the cool night air on his skin, to take in the sight of his daughter walking free beside him. He knew the cameras would follow them. He knew the headlines would run wild. But none of that mattered as much as the simple truth filling his chest. They had faced the storm, and they had not been broken. The cameras were gone. For the first time in days, Shaq sat on a quiet park bench. The city stretched softly behind him. The shouts, chants, and headlines faded into a distant hum. Jade sat beside him, her shoulders slightly hunched, her face turned toward the setting sun, eyes half closed. As the warmth touched her skin, the trees rustled gently overhead, the air cool with the promise of evening. And for once there were no reporters, no microphones, no flashing lights, just a father and daughter breathing in the same space. Shaq leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, his massive hands clasped together. His eyes followed a small child riding a scooter down the path, her laughter bubbling into the air, her mother trailing a few steps behind, smiling softly. He wondered, not for the first time, what it felt like to raise a child in a world where you didn't have to teach them how to be afraid. Jade exhaled slowly beside him. "It's weird," she murmured. "How fast it all moves. How they jump to the next story." Shaq turned his head slightly, watching her. Her face still held faint shadows of exhaustion, but her eyes were clear now, sharp again. He reached out, gently covering her hand with his. "That's the game, baby. But we're not playing for cameras." Jade gave a small, tired smile. "No, we're not." They sat in silence for a long stretch, letting the sounds of the park fill the space. The faint murmur of voices, the whisper of leaves, the scrape of shoes on the walking path. Shaq felt the weight in his chest, the heaviness that had lived there since the night Jade was taken away, still pressing on his ribs, still making it a little harder to breathe. But beneath it there was something else now too, a flicker of fire, of resolve. "I'm proud of you," he said quietly. "You didn't break." Jade's gaze flicked toward him, her mouth curving into something bittersweet. "I almost did. But you didn't," Shaq said firmly, his deep voice steady. "You She nodded slowly, the memory washing through her, the cell walls, The cold bench, the steady drum of fear and anger inside her chest. She had survived it, but she knew the scars would linger, invisible but real. Shaq leaned back, his broad shoulders stretching against the worn bench. "I keep thinking," he murmured, "about when I was your age. The things I faced. The things I buried because I thought fame would shield me. But it didn't. Not really." Jade looked at him, her eyes softening. "You protected me from a lot, Dad." He smiled faintly. "Not from everything." His eyes darkened slightly, shadows flickering in their depths. "You learn after a while that you can't protect people from the world. You can only teach them how to fight back." They fell into another stretch of silence, the sky overhead bleeding slowly from gold to purple. Far away, the news cycle had moved on. Other stories filled the headlines, other controversies, other scandals. But in small corners of the internet, in quiet community meetings, in whispered conversations between parents and children, the story of Jade O'Neal lingered. It had sparked something, not a revolution overnight, but a tremor, a shift, a reminder. Shaq knew it. He felt it in the way people looked at him now, not just as the larger-than-life figure they'd seen on TV, but as a man, a father, a black man standing in a world that still saw his skin before his soul. He turned back to Jade, his brow furrowing slightly. "You know this isn't over, right?" Jade's smile faded into something more serious. "Yeah. I know." Shaq drew a slow breath. "I can stand up there. I can speak into microphones. But you're the future, Jade. You've got a voice. You've got a story. And people are listening." Her throat tightened slightly. "It's scary." "I know," Shaq said softly. "But you're stronger than you think." They sat for a long time as the light faded, letting the truth of those words settle between them. When they finally rose, the park had thinned out. The shadows stretched long and soft across the pavement. They walked side by side down the winding path, the faint glow of the city flickering in the distance. Jade glanced up at her father. "What do we do now?" Shaq's mouth tightened thoughtfully. "We keep going. We fight smart. We work with Camille. We shine a light where they want shadows." Jade nodded, her chest tightening with a mix of fear and determination. "I don't want what happened to me to be just a headline, Dad." Shaq stopped walking, turning to face her fully. His massive hands settled gently on her shoulders, his eyes steady, his voice low and fierce. "It won't be, baby. I promise you that. We're going to turn this into something real, something that lasts." Jade felt the sting of tears behind her eyes, but held them back. She reached up, resting her hands over his. "You've always fought for me." Shaq's lips curved into a small, sad smile. "Now we fight together." They kept walking, their steps slow, the world stretching out ahead of them like a wide, uncertain road. But they walked with purpose now, with a promise wrapped between them, not just to heal, but to push, to demand, to build something better. They knew the cameras would come back. They knew the headlines would rise and fall. But this, the bond between them, the fire that had been lit, this was something that wouldn't fade. As they reached the edge of the park, Shaq looked up at the sky, the stars just beginning to pierce the deepening blue. He drew a long, slow breath, feeling the weight of the world on his shoulders. And yet, for the first time in days, he didn't feel crushed by it. He felt ready. Jade slipped her arm through his, leaning lightly against his side. "Ready to go home, Dad?" Shaq smiled softly, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Yeah, baby, let's go home." They walked away together, their shadows stretching long behind them, a father and daughter stepping forward, not into a victory, but into a fight they were determined to carry all the way forward. Because in the end, it wasn't about the headlines. It wasn't about the cameras. It was about the promise they carried between them. We will not be broken. We will not be silent. And we will not stop. If this story stirred something in you, don't let it stop at the last word. Speak up when you see injustice. Not just for headlines, but for real change in your own streets. Remember, every voice added makes the collective roar louder. Be the kind of witness who doesn't just watch history, but helps rewrite it.